I think one of the worst things you can do is say to someone else, I'm going to give you unlimited time and unlimited budget. I think that's terrible for creativity. I think constraints are very, very good for creativity.
Welcome to the Science of Creativity. I'm your host, Dr. Keith Sawyer. Today, I'm going to talk with James Taylor. He's a creativity keynote speaker, and he's the author of the new book, SuperCreativity. We're going to talk about why creativity is fundamentally collaborative and using the metaphor of a jazz ensemble and how that can help teach organizations and the rest of us how to be more creative and more collaborative. And we're also going to talk about how humans can work with AI as a collaborative partner rather than a replacement. It's a really practical and wide-ranging conversation about how creativity actually works in the real world. I'm here today with James Taylor. He's a keynote speaker, an expert in creativity and innovation. We're going to have a conversation about his expertise in artificial intelligence. We'll talk about using creativity in organizations and the power of collaboration in driving creativity. James, welcome to the Science of Creativity.
Well, thank you for having me on. And actually, Keith, I don't know if you know this, but you are the very first interview I'm doing for my very first book. So this is a bit of a landmark that we're going through together.
That's wonderful. And thank you for sending me a pre-release copy of the book. I read it, of course, and it's a wonderful book. It's incredibly well written. I can tell it wasn't written with generative AI because it has a personality. It's actually quality writing, and it's packed with tips and advice and recommendations. I guess it's fair to say it's not a research book. It's not a science book. It's a practical book, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was primarily written for my audience, which my main job really is as a keynote speaker on creativity and artificial intelligence. And so I wanted something to be very practical for, I think often my job is taking some of the great research that's going on out there within creativity or within artificial intelligence, people like yourself and many of the guests you have on your show, and then kind of translating that for that business audience that only has an hour to hear a keynote, or their attention span is maybe not like a scholar would have, going deep. So hopefully that's what I've kind of tried to do in the book, is to kind of make some of that a little bit more actionable in terms of some of the research that's coming out. Some of it, as you know, is evergreen. Some of that research that's out, it just kind of works time and time again. And other areas, especially the human and AI kind of creativity, which the book kind of it talks a lot about. A lot of that is kind of newer because the research is only really just starting to come out now.
And I can tell as a creativity researcher, as I'm reading the book, that the creativity research it's there in the background, and it grounds everything that you say. Everything I read is completely consistent with creativity research. So you must have done all of the reading, you did all of the studying. You obviously know the creativity research, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I love reading the works of researchers coming out, even for someone that's not a scholar like myself and not I'm not an academic, but there's so many wonderful books out there and a lot of online courses that are coming out as well. And so I had a lot of fun. I mean, for me, this journey started about 8 years ago. Initially, kind of just having a passion about creativity myself and my background before that, and kind of just diving into some of this research. And I just wish I'd had the time to be able to maybe go on a university, go and study perhaps, do it properly. So I had to do it the other way around. But what was good is that kind of learning all these new things and then thinking about, how it applies to many of my audience who are the C-suite and, the VPs, general managers of companies that don't want to just hear, probably if you were to pitch them on an idea of a creativity keynote, it'd be a harder sell. So I have to sweeten things a little bit for them so it works for a live audience.
Right. And then what you were doing instead of going and getting a PhD is, as I understand it, you were a talent manager for some well-known musicians. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I come from a long line of musicians. My grandfather was a professional musician. My father's a professional musician. My wife is a jazz singer. So lots of music and when I first left school, actually, I was a professional drummer, and that's how I kind of got involved in that. But I actually found that I really loved the business side of the music industry. And so very quickly, when I was about 19, 20, I started managing the careers of music artists and pop rock stars, and we had a number of artists. Some of your audience will know people, bands like Deacon Blue, sold about 6 million albums, and a lot of classical, a lot of jazz artists. I'm particularly into jazz music myself. And then we started record labels and music publishing. So I was usually the person not on the stage. I was the person kind of backstage or just at the side of the stage, as other, what maybe the audience would say is that the creative people would be on the stage performing. But as you and I know, the creativity is not just on the stage itself.
Well, I mean, your book starts with a story about the Royal Albert Hall. And one of the artists you managed with was performing there, and you emphasize the importance of being backstage and the collaborative combinations that come when everybody's involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing when you go to a concert, whether it's Royal Albert Hall in London or a great music festival, and you see that singer on the stage or the band on the stage, and you think, wow, this kind of lone creative genius, like this is amazing that they're doing this. The Taylor Swifts of this world, or whoever else the artist is. But what you don't usually see as an audience member is the hundreds of 200 people backstage who are just as much a part of making a creative and successful and innovative show as the person with the spotlight on them. And even like an example like Taylor Swift there, for example, most people don't know that she'll have a vocal coach. She also has a performance coach, someone that tells her, like, this is the point where you want to be on the stage to have that strong impact. She'll have a musical director. She has all these people around her in order for her to shine. So I really talk about that creativity being not just on the stage, but in the backstage. And that message actually really resonates. I was just speaking in Tampa in Florida this week, and it was for all general managers that are managers of some of the big conference venues and stadiums in the US. And they resonated really a lot with that message, because they can see that, that sports star on the field or that music artist on the stage. And then they look at their team, which is 100 people or so, who are just as creative, doing incredible things to make that a successful show. So I wanted to pay tribute in the book to those backstage heroes.
That experience sounds like it was really powerful for you. And you talk about being a drummer yourself, and you're deeply involved with the music scene. How did that experience change the way that you think about creativity in a broader context when you go into organizations? I mean, what's the connection? Was there something you took from that musical experience that we can use?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. There's a lot of egos in the music industry. And it's interesting when you go and work with, say, a big global law firm or a big global consulting firm, or even in the healthcare industry with top surgeons. There's big egos there. So one of the things that I noticed from both my music world and in the work I do today is those great leaders, they're able to create this sense of psychological safety within an organization that really empowers everyone to put forward their own ideas as well, not just be beholden to this top person in the lead position. And as important as that is to challenge other people's ideas as well. And and I think that requires a level of trust in an organization or a team to not just say that sounds very good, but to push back. I mean, I actually think it's quite funny with a lot of the generative AI tools. Some of them are quite subservient in tone. That was a great piece that you just wrote there, or that was a great thing. And actually, that's not really what I want from a great collaborator. I want someone that's going to push back, that's going to make my work better. There was a brilliant documentary a few years ago. I think it was Robert Cato was the name of the author, the history of American presidents. And it was all about his editor. And it was the relationship that we had between the writer and the editor. And I think this is something that those within the world of creativity research know a lot about, because we call it creative pairs. That's a term that we'll often use, and I talk about that in the book, that relationship, whether it's in music, Bruce Springsteen, Steve Van Zandt, that's his kind of creative peer, or whether I see a lot of CEOs who their chairman is their creative peer, or their CFO is their creative peer in their organization. So that's probably one of the biggest things that I see that tracks across from music industry to business as a whole.
Your book is called SuperCreativity, and it might make some people think about the geniuses, right? Or the people that are exceptionally creative. But that's not your message. You spend a lot of time in the book emphasizing teamwork, collaboration, And that resonated with me because, my own research is about jazz ensembles. What's the connection between your individual creativity and the power of collaboration?
Yeah, so in the book, I break down these three types of what I call kind of super creativity. So the first is the one that we often think of most, which is that individual who's doing something great, who's kind of trying to improve their creativity in one way or the other, whatever they do. And there's lots of skills and tips and tools that we can do to do that. So our own personal creativity for ourselves. Then there's a second type, which is the human plus human, and that could be in the form of those kind of creative peers we spoke about, or it could be in the form of building a highly creative and collaborative team together. And then the third part is this human plus machine creative collaboration. Very, at the moment most likely it takes the form of us working with things like generative AI tools to, build something, create something together. Within AI, AI itself has been around since 1956, so it's not a new technology. We're moving now into the time of what we call agentic AI, and so it's like humans working with AI agents and agentic forms. And then another area which I didn't really speak about so much in the book, but maybe something I might focus on future books in, is really about the robotics side, because some of my clients that work within distribution or manufacturing, and I look at some of those factories. I don't know whether you've ever had a chance to go into like an automotive factory, and it's a ballet between robots and humans working together. And I think that's the other side of this idea of collaboration. So individual collaboration, what people might call individual or personal creativity. Then there is human plus human creativity, and then human plus machine creativity. And I really say, like, all of this together is this idea of how we can become super creative as an individual, how we can unleash our creative powers that we have, that I believe we're all born with. And it's what we do over the course of our lives with it that's important.
So participating in the collaborative groups, I think that enhances your own individual creative potential too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's also fun. It's more fun. It's always more fun doing something with another person, with someone else. So I think an idea becomes better. I haven't actually seen it yet. Everyone's been telling me that I've given early versions of the book that I had to watch the Beatles documentary. There's a new Beatles documentary, Peter Jackson.
Right.
And I haven't seen it yet. I haven't had a chance to see it, but I'm told that film is a lot about four people working on something together. Someone starts an idea, someone puts forward something, maybe that's not good, but someone else comes in with that trips someone else up to think about something else. And then you see this thing being formed in real time. And I think that's really beautiful when you see that. And then also we live in a global world. So how do you do that when you're not physically in the same room as one another? And there's some examples I mentioned in the book about how different organizations are trying to do that. So to create a way of virtually improving that. But I still think, and I think this is why in real life events are so important, and is why I think going to college or going to university is so important, because that in real life, when you're together, we don't riff the same way when we're virtually. And I think companies like Amazon, people like Andy Jassy, the CEO of Amazon, that's why he was so keen to get people back into the office. Now, we don't need to go to the office every day, but there's something to be said for being together physically.
That same thing happens to me, by the way, when I see the Peter Jackson movie. People who know I study collaborative creativity, they say, you got to see this movie. So I did, and you're right, it's incredible. You mentioned a parallel between this kind of collaboration and two metaphors that I think are very apt. One of them is orchestration, and the other one is jazz ensemble improvisation. Can you give an example from the real world, from, say, a business setting, from an invention that is an improvisation or an orchestration?
A good example of that is there was Adobe, a software company in the US. They have these things called kickboxes. And I think I talk about these in the book as well. And it's just a very simple red cardboard box. And inside the box, there's Post-it notes, a notebook for bad ideas, because we'd need lots of bad ideas to get good ideas. There's a Starbucks card. And there's one more thing. There's $1,000 prepaid debit card the team can spend however they want without having to justify the work they're doing. And I think that's interesting for a number of reasons. I think one of the worst things you can do, and I was a jazz musician myself as well, and my father's a jazz musician, is, say to someone else, I'm going to give you unlimited time and unlimited budget. I think that's terrible for creativity. I think constraints are very, very good for creativity. And I think within, let's say, jazz music as an example is a very good example of that, where you have a form, you have an AAB form, or what the form of the tune is. You're working within a certain chord structure, harmonic structure. But within that, you get to stretch. You really get to push. And you're listening to what the other players are doing, and you're kind of taking maybe something that they do and kind of making a continuation for that. You're also supporting what they do. And in the case of the Adobe Kickbox, why that's very interesting is the CEO of Adobe said, we gave 1,000 of these kickboxes out to any member of the team, any teams within the organization that had an idea for something that could be improved, or a process, or a new product, or a new service. They could ask for one of these boxes. These boxes would be sent to them. There was no red tape, no manager approval required. And then they could basically build out some what we would call minimum viable products within the kind of startup terminology. And then those 1,000 red boxes go to the executive team to review these minimum viable products. And the CEO of Adobe said, we only needed one of these projects to work for the whole thing to pay for itself. They had 1,000 of these. So in this case, they chose 26, and those 26 were given blue boxes, which is additional resources, and they could go and could spend on that and make it into a final product or a service or initiative in some way. But I thought what was nice about that, as an example, is it gives that sense of that psychological safety, that everyone is responsible for driving innovation in the organization. Everyone has creativity. That's what it's kind of saying. It's a little bit like the 20% rule that the Google have. But I think the other nice thing it does is it says, in order to do something truly great, it's not just going to be you on your own. You have to assemble a team, put people together, people with different perspectives. And why I love a lot of the AI stuff just now is, if you don't do it in the default settings, everyone talks about prompt engineering with generative AI. And where a human gives a prompt to the AI tool, ChatGPT or whatever the tool is. But no one talks about it coming the other way, that the AI should be prompting the human, getting us to think about maybe a way that we haven't considered doing something before as well. So I think that prompting can actually go both ways. So that improvisational nature where technology at its best should just disappear. And that's kind of some of the areas I kind of see there's a little bit of a crossover from the jazz world. And then the other thing that's nice about the jazz world is, if you make a mistake, just make the same mistake again, and they'll think it's jazz.
Right. Well, it's a great metaphor. And I think you brought up this tension between constraint and openness. And I think that's consistent with all of the research that I've done as well, that improvisation doesn't mean that there's no structure to the group's activity, and it's not going to be anything effective. It's going to be chaotic. And there's one thing I really liked about your book is that you talk in several places about the tension between these two different forces, the constraint and ambiguity or risk versus certainty. Then you talk about being rebellious versus being conservative. And so my question practically is, how do you know what's the right amount of constraint? When do you know, is it too many constraints, or do you have too few? I mean, if you're a manager and you're creating an environment, so how do you know? How do you know to balance that?
Yeah, I mean, balance, that's an interesting one, because actually sometimes what you don't want is balance. This is like another music thing, I guess, but I was at a concert recently. Andras Schiff, who's a great pianist, was very famous for doing Bach. And he was explaining that a lot of Bach music, piano music, is essentially the emotional field doesn't go up too much and down too much. It stays with a particular feel, joy or fear or whatever, but it stays that through the entire piece. When the Beethovens of this world came along and they were creating these symphonies, they were taking you on this emotional journey from the lowest lows to the highest highs. And they were putting you through this emotional ringer in some ways. So they weren't looking for balance necessarily. They were looking for like, how can we take you? I can only take you that high if I've taken you down to the other side. So I think, probably the person I think of that would exemplify this really well as someone that kind of mixes is someone like in the case of music, a David Bowie, for example. He would have these periods where he would be very solitary, doing very solitary individual work. And then he would go and he would just want to get out in the world, bring people, amazing different musicians, different people together. He would also he would go out and to learn, and this is, inputs now on the creative side. He would go to the edges of art forms, visual art forms, musical art forms, where all the weird stuff was really happening. But when he brought that back and he would create something, he was having to create it for the general populace. And so if you that doesn't exist on the edges. What is great is when you have people that kind of go out to the weird things and then kind of bring it back and actually can translate that for the general kind of population, so they can experience that as well. So I think sometimes when we see these, this thing versus that, I think the joy of that sometimes is not necessarily a kind of a balance, but actually be willing to go to those different extremes and experience that at its fullest. And if you read biographies of a lot of composers like the Mahlers of this world, they would have these deep ups and downs in what they're doing as well. And I think, and this is now going into the more the health, the human side of creativity. I think one of the hardest things, and why I think you and I have spoken about this discussion before as well, is all that research was going about mental health and creativity, and famous people, and I think one of the things of that is, in order to put yourself out there and to really touch those emotions, you have to have that touch that within yourself first before you can touch other people. That requires, going back to that word you mentioned earlier, an openness, and that's quite putting yourself out there in that way, whether it's writing a book or a play or doing some research and putting that out into the world. That is an emotional experience. You have to become invested in the thing that you create. And so when an album is not thought of very well, or a new product comes out and people don't like it and they don't buy it, that can be really hard, I think, for very, very creative people, because it feels like a personal attack. They're not attacking the product that they've created, they're attacking them and themselves.
You're listening to The Science of Creativity, a podcast about art, design, and invention. If you're enjoying the episode, I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast and rate the show and leave a comment, because it helps people like you find the show. You can find The Science of Creativity on all podcast platforms. It's interesting that you brought this up, the connection between creativity and creative action and emotions or personal growth. There used to be this narrative about creativity being connected with mental illness, and in recent years, I've seen a lot more about creativity being connected to wellness and to personal growth. And absolutely, I think that's the case myself, that creativity is linked to personal growth and to wellness.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, I don't know whether I would call it the myth, that connection, but I'm very, very conscious of not perpetuating that story in speeches that I give. I don't think it's that helpful, frankly. And also, I still think it feels like the jury is out. Does the fact that if someone is their mental health is in a different kind of place, is more challenged, does that mean that they're more likely to go into the creative arts, for an example, or is it the other way? Is it the other way around? I don't know, and I don't feel qualified to. I haven't seen anything that's been that kind of nail on the head that's really convinced me on that as well. I think what is nice is when you talk to people about as you said, the kind of creativity and well-being side. I think that's such a symbiotic relationship. I had a guest on my SuperCreativity podcast a while ago. You were kind enough to come on as well. Professor Jabelli, his name is, who wrote a wonderful book called The Brain at Rest. And he was talking about biophilia, about how the physical environment that we're around, how that affects our creativity and our creativity levels. And then obviously there's been work from, and I talk about this in the book, the University of British Columbia, the University of Berlin, the best color to have around you for doing certain types of creative work is the color green. It's one of the reasons why we often get that best idea when we're out in nature. And that's a very simplistic version of it. There's a much more complicated version of it. But I think that's interesting in terms of our relationship to nature, that we are part of nature. And then when you think about it from that way, and this is the discussion I was having with Professor Jabelli about it, was we were talking about the worldwide wood, that one tree in a forest is sick. The other trees through the underground system send nutrients to that tree. And so kind of going back to what we spoke about at the very start with creativity being collaborative, I kind of think that's what's going on. I think that when you see someone that has a kernel of an idea or something and you want to help that person, that is like that worldwide wood. That is, I think we're kind of hardwired to do that. And I don't know where that's, the kind of the genetic side of, we want to perpetuate, therefore it's better if we collaborate, that's that side, or something else is going on. But I think there's a fascinating connection with the health, well-being, nature, and creativity.
And I think that's connected with your emphasis on sustainability in the book. I mean, toward the end of the book. And then also I read a lot on your website, and you've got a speaker packet there, and you emphasize sustainability even with your clients, even with your speaking gigs. And that seems pretty connected to this nature, worldwide woods.
Yeah, and it's funny actually, but just now, because I'm noticing that word creativity is changing now, because I felt that even when I first started doing this, that creativity was a word you wouldn't often use in a business context. Maybe the advertising industry or certain marketing teams, they would be happy to use that word, or R&D, but it felt like it was a verboten word. And the business world would use the word innovation, and obviously creativity and innovation, they are different things, but they'd be much more comfortable. Yeah, they'd be much more comfortable by using those words. I think that's changing. And a lot of the younger workers I speak to in the workforce, they are much more comfortable about using creativity, even though sometimes it actually be innovation, but they talk about creativity as a word. And I think we also see this a little bit on the sustainability side. I'm actually just about to head out this afternoon to go and speak in Istanbul, and it's for a well-known oil and gas company, and they have a whole day dedicated to sustainability. Interestingly, because they more publicly they wouldn't necessarily be talking about sustainability as a word, but they recognize the value, the impact, how that's kind of where the world is going, and for them, in order to design the kind of products and services that are going to be required for this net zero world or more sustainable world, it requires them to be more creative and be more innovative. And that's how those things start to link up. I feel very, very strongly that the problems that we have in the world today are all solvable by being more creative and coming up with ideas and working together. And I think it's with us as the humans to kind of resolve some of these. Some of them are more technological things, some of them more governance related as well. But that's why I love this topic of creativity, because it feels like it's the wellspring for so many of the solutions for the problems that we're seeing in the world today.
I think your book does a really good job of just connecting these things. Like what we're saying right now is so wide ranging, so many concepts. You got sustainability, you got nature, you got the color green is about creativity. And it's the same way in your book. I'm thinking about what question to ask next, because I could go in so many different directions from your book. But I wanted to ask you about flow, the concept of flow as a peak experience, because we were just talking about well-being and wellness, and the flow state being a really positive human experience. And you talk about that in chapter 6. So how do you get into this flow state?
I was actually talking to a client yesterday about this when I was in Florida, and we actually spoke about this, the flow, and Mihaly and his work with that wonderful book as well. And these were all general managers I was having a conversation with, and they have correctly recognized that what got them here in their business is not going to take them to the next stage of growth that they want to go to. And I said one of the problems and it's the nature of management, unfortunately, is we work in manager's time. So those 15, 30-minute segments in our calendar, where I think maker's time requires just longer periods of deep work or flow to get into flow. I mean, I know just for myself, if I'm writing, whether it's a keynote or work for books, it takes me about 30 minutes in the morning just to get into something. I just need to, it's almost like stretching, like working out or going for a run or doing yoga. It just takes me that long. And that's just for me. I'm sure some people can get in that flow state straight away. But for me, it takes me 30 minutes. So if I've only dedicated 30 minutes to a piece of deep creative work I want to do, I'm done. I have no time to really use that sense of flow. So I think one of the best things, and this is what I do, and I don't know, I think I talk about this in the book as well, is I divide up my day. And this works for me, it won't work for everyone, but in the morning is that maker's time. So I know that I have a longer period of time, a 3-hour block, which is pretty flexible, and I know that I can get into that type of flow state. If I can just work on that. In the afternoon, it's 15-minute, 30-minute segments. I'm doing calls, I'm doing emails, I'm doing interviews, doing other things as well. For me, that works. Maybe for you or for someone else, for them, it's going to work better. They do their calls and things in the morning, and then afternoon, that's when they do. Or I know some people are, late in the evening. For them, that's their time. And I think it's such a simple thing for you to do, is to find what time of day you more naturally get into that flow state, and then try and shape your day as much as you can to support that, because we are all wired in slightly different ways.
You just touched on something that I think about a lot when I'm talking to executives or large corporations, that they hear I'm talking about creativity, and sometimes they're dismissive because they think I want you to be creative all the time, that you want to be creative 8 hours a day. They just think there's shit we got to get done.
Yeah.
And I say, absolutely. And, most organizations, what is it? They say, I would say 90% of everyone's time is just getting the stuff done that has to get done. But if it's 100% of the time when you're just doing that shit, then you don't have any time left over. You got to have some space in there for the innovation. And that space has got to be the engine that drives creativity, whether it's 5%, 10%, 20%. And that's like your 3 hours.
Yeah. And I know some other friends I have, they work in a slightly different way. They're just the nature of their jobs. They have a lot of pressure that they have to do in the work they do. So they just give themselves one day a week where they block out everything else. And that's really when they want to focus on doing deep work. So they will almost kind of prepare in advance for that particular day. They know the questions that they want to think about. And it might only be one question. They want to spend the whole day thinking about that one challenge or that one opportunity. And some people, that works really well. Other people, there was, I can't remember if it's Bill Gates that I know he has a reading week. I think he has a thinking week as well, because obviously reading is not the same as thinking. I think, there's a danger sometimes when we can get convinced into thinking we're kind of thinking and being creative, but we're actually just consuming and bringing stuff in, inputting things. And as much as I love Apple devices, I've got lots of Apple devices. I think when Steve Jobs probably first decided to create some of those devices, he was thinking them as tools of creativity, but really what most of them are now is tools of consumption. And I think you have to think about the tools, the physical things that you have around you. And I was just talking to someone yesterday, a very successful investor in a lot of different businesses in the US. And he has these, I think they're called black wings, these pencils or something wings. They're like the old school pencils. And he just says for him, the physicality of having that pencil and that notepad, because most of what he's doing is on a computer every single day, just gets him using a different part of his mind. And it allows him to, and also the other thing, the reason he likes using a pencil is it slows down his thinking. And as we know, like pattern recognize, like thinking fast, thinking slow, sometimes you want your thinking to be going really fast, but sometimes you actually want to slow down your thinking a little bit. And writing in a pencil is actually quite good because it does force you to slow down your thinking.
Yeah, exactly. I hear that a lot from the artists and designers that I talk to. I've been interviewing professors in art and design school, Some of them say that they have this requirement for their students in their classes. They say you can't use pens, has to be pencils.
Yeah. There's a different. The physical things that you use. I think there's this tactile. I remember actually you were talking about the book. We were talking about the book Flow, Haley's book. There was something that I'm pretty sure he said in that book, which I remembered and I use today, is having little ornaments and things around you, around your kind of desk space if you work. And it could be something you've picked up on holiday or vacation or something that you got given at some event. And what it does is it often triggers these yeah, exactly, behind you just now. It triggers, it's like these random associations that you trigger. And so I'm often picking up little things and taking them with me as well. And so you have the physical thing that you're perhaps using, but then there's this wonderful concept of they have it in cooker in being a chef of mise en place or mise en place, of having the things around you physically within, easy to get to, of the tools of creation that you want to do. And if anyone's listening to just now in their usual workspace, do you have things around you that are those kind of tools of creation for you, or are the things around you tools of consumption? And so that setting up your space so it really lends itself to creativity. I think artists have known this for years. They understand this instinctually almost. But I think it would be quite good if business executives also woke up to that.
Yeah, absolutely. You've mentioned AI several times, and of course, everybody is wondering how that's going to change everything, and even creativity. And it's toward the end of your book, especially, and something you said earlier in our interview. You were talking about collaboration. And that's a big theme for both of us in our writings, that collaboration drives creativity. And then it sounded to me like you were saying that when a person interacts with an AI, that's a type of collaboration. And maybe it's similar to the way that two people collaborate. So did I get that right? That when you're with an AI, it's kind of like you're creating with another person?
Yeah. I don't make such a big distinction whether you're collaborating with another human or another AI. Obviously, they have different experiences. They have different sets of data, I guess, in terms of their life experiences and what they're pulling from. But I think it's great because a lot of people, they might work in solitude, and to have someone that they can, or something, let's say, in the case of AI, to bounce ideas off, I think is actually very useful. I mean, I do this all the time with my keynotes. When I'm working on a keynote, I ask the client to give me the list of the attendees, and I will then use an AI tool to create 3 or 4 audience avatars for this particular audience. And then I will then do my draft presentation. I will give it to the AI and say, okay, I want you to view this presentation from the perspective of each of these 4 avatars. How would you criticize it? What do you like? What do you dislike about it? And that is very useful because that information, then I'm able to go back and do a revision on it. So hopefully it's more impactful for the people in the room. So I think especially like someone like myself that has a very small team, just to have that kind of sounding board, I think is wonderful. I think that's a really great thing that AI is able to do. It's not going to write my keynote for me. That's not the point. It's just allowing me to kind of think, and also to deal with my own cognitive biases. For example, it would tell me, it would give me the information on an audience, and it would say, actually, in the book I talk about this idea like centaurs, or I'll use certain more European phraseology for certain things. If I'm speaking to people from the farm lending industry in Kentucky, I mean, I almost instinctively know I'm not going to be using those words. I'm going to be using like superheroes, and I'm going to be using different ways I tell my story. But sometimes you kind of get stuck in a bit of a rut, and having something say, hey, you're not really speaking to this audience. This audience is not going to feel seen. If you do the keynote like you're suggesting here, you need to think about this thing. You need to view it from this perspective. Oh, okay. And I think that's the good thing about AI. So one of the hardest decisions I had to make in the book, and I had to make it pretty early on, is how much do I want to make this an AI book, and how much do I want to make this a creativity book? I feel that creativity is an evergreen. People are going to be wanting to understand their creativity in 100 years' time. Artificial intelligence, not so much. So I had to I felt I was trying to get that right blend, which is why it's not 50% or 60% of the book is AI related. But I also kind of wanted to take people into that journey of this is kind of where we're going with different forms of AI. And this is how I think you can do this to become, be more super creative in the work you're doing.
You're right. It's toward the end of the book, but everybody wants to know about AI. And I'm like you, I wouldn't say I'm an AI skeptic, but I don't necessarily think AI is going to change everything about creativity. And, the research about creativity has been around for so long, and we know so much about, at least about human creativity and collaboration. So I like the way you tried to fit it together, that when we're collaborating, you think of using the AI as a form of collaboration. And then maybe you model it after two people collaborating. So it's not that your ability to collaborate doesn't turn into some radical new form of collaboration. It still continues to be the power of creative collaboration, even with AI.
Yeah. And I think, obviously, this is in the form of a book. There's a super creativity book. But when I give my keynotes on super creativity, it leans much more onto the AI side, because that's what people are really interested in just now. They want to understand that just now. So in the case of a keynote, maybe 60% of it is going to be a little bit more on here's how organizations are blending human creativity and artificial intelligence to create these amazing things. But in the case of the book, I wanted to have it slightly more accessible for a wider audience. And then you can do slightly different things, with the keynote as well, because every audience is going to be very different for a keynote.
I like the way you've used this word 2 or 3 times now, evergreen. And that's when a book about creativity in general is evergreen, meaning in 5 or 10 years, it's going to be just as relevant. And you said this a few minutes ago, that AI is very much of the moment. And in 3 or 5 years, there might be a new technology, and then your AI book is going to be dated.
Yeah.
So I think the balance you have done, it's really pretty strategic.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the other thing, a question I had to try and figure out, because I do my keynotes, but I also do workshops, which is more creativity skills training is really what it is, or creative thinking tools is what I'm giving them. And I thought, how much of that do I want to put in the book as well? I kind of went back and forth on that a little bit. And, I often think my wife's a singer, and she also teaches singing as well. So much of it are the fundamentals of singing. Like in this case, in singing, breath control, breath support. And different teachers give it slightly different names, or you do use a slightly different way of saying it or a different way of teaching it. But the fundamentals are the fundamentals, the principles are the principles, and they're unlikely to change in 100 years' time. And what I tried to do with some of the tools, I thought these are things that will, if someone was to teach them in 100 years' time, I think they would still work. They would still work, because even like in the world of creativity, and this is the research is telling us new things all the time. And I thought I was trying, like, how can I make this book as future-proof as I possibly can, even knowing that, probably within 5 years, 25% of it is maybe going to be dated, and you're going to have to figure this out. But I thought if I can have the core of the book feeling really good, and someone like a Julia Cameron's, the Artist's Way, I think, some of the phraseology doesn't work as well for today, because it was written at a certain time in the early 80s, and it was written from a certain perspective. But some of the things that she teaches within that, I think, hold up today just as much as it did when that book was originally written.
Right. And Csikszentmihalyi's book about flow, it was published in 1990. And, speaking of evergreen, how long ago was that? 35 years ago. Yeah, right.
Absolutely. And I hear, and one of the joys of having a podcast like yourself, as well as I get to interview these other researchers and academics, and I hear the work that they're researching. And I thought, this is going to be fantastic. Imagine, like, in a few years' time, we're going to know so much more. Probably one of my great heroes was someone like Edward de Bono. And he was just getting into talking about it when the world of neuroscience was really just getting started. You could argue that a lot of the artificial intelligence is the new neuroscience for today. So imagine if we fast forward to 5 years, the things that we will know about creativity that we don't know today.
Yeah, you're right. I remember that too. It really was the trend for some time. You had pictures of everybody's brain with red and green and yellow.
Yeah. Left and right. It was people were talking left. Are you left, right brain or right brain? There was all that side of things as well.
Right. You're right. And it has faded. I hadn't even thought about that. But we don't see those colored brains anymore in the newspapers now. We're just reading about AI. But I do think some of those cognitive neuroscience books, they're still worth reading. The findings there are true. I mean, it's science. That's one reason I'm a scientist. You make discoveries and they're true. There are things that are going to influence people for many years to come, I hope.
Yeah, it's a great, if anyone that's listening to this just now who's, maybe they're thinking about going back to college or going to college for the first time. I think there's some wonderful courses out, programs out there now that in terms of creativity, understanding creativity, all its dimensions as well. And you're studying it as unfortunately, I think it seems to be primarily in America where these programs are taught. I don't see as many of them in Europe. I don't see as many of them in the Middle East, but hopefully that changes over time. Hopefully there's going to be lots of programs, teaching people to really understand this and to research it as well.
Right. And, workshops like yours, if you take the show to the town that you're in, I think a lot about the executive education full day workshops that I've done quite a few of them where I'm doing a lot of them through the School of Business, basically as an adjunct faculty member. But in your case, you're, independent consulting operation, right? Successful. You've had a very successful consulting practice. If I look at your website, I see the list of countries you've been to. You just mentioned Turkey and then a wide range of industries. And I like that industry range because a lot of times when people talk about creativity, they think about design thinking, they think about Apple and Google, they think about Silicon Valley, high technology. But there's a large segment of the economy that's not high tech, like you might be making tractors. And the people in those companies, you don't want them to think, that's not me, that's not for me, I'm not in Silicon Valley. But I absolutely believe that the messages work for every type of industry. One thing I wanted to ask you is, maybe it's kind of a trick question. I was going to say, which industries do you think need creativity the most? And I was pretty sure you were going to say everybody, all industries.
Well, I would say government and education are probably the two industries I think it could, think about it as an industry that could use them the most. Usually the industries that are most keen on bringing me in are ones where there is a competitive nature. They have to innovate. That is part of, there's very innovative spaces. There's a competitive side to it. For me, one of the things that I actually really enjoy is, there was a study a few years ago, I think it was from the Adobe State of Creativity one, where they said that only 40% of people globally would describe themselves as being creative. And I remember early thinking about this and it's going to be different. Like in South Korea, it's going to be as low as 10% might consider themselves to be creative. In America, it's probably going to be about 50%. But I do remember thinking about this at the time and thinking, well, as a speaker, and I speak in 25 countries every year. I did just over 250,000 miles last year traveling around the world. I'll do maybe 100 keynotes and presentations a year. I thought, who do I want to go? I know the easy audience to go for, which is those 40%, people that already consider themselves to be creative. And I thought, that's not the main mission for me. The main mission for me is to take that 60% and convert them into people to understand that they are creative themselves, that they have this creative capacity. They didn't think. So early on, I actually went for those boring industries, as you would, accounting, audit. You're talking about manufacturing, Caterpillar, I think one of my clients. So it wasn't just the tech firms. It was often those people that work, we're talking about going back to start, talking kind of backstage in the unsexy industries that would never describe themselves as being creative. I thought that's the audience I want to be able to reach. And that's a harder job. I can go in, I can initially start talking to them about innovation, artificial intelligence. That's the language that they're happy to use. But very quickly, I want to pivot to really talking to them about creativity and showing them that they're more creative. And there's nothing that gives me more joy is if I start the start of a keynote and I ask people in the room, how many of you consider yourself to be creative? And 5% of the people in the room put their hands up. And at the end of that session, nearly 100% people put their hands up. And I thought, that's a day well spent for me, because I've helped people recognize something that I believe that they were all born with anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very fulfilling. I agree with you. I enjoy speaking to audiences where, and I see a lot of people out there who are absolutely certain that they're not creative. For example, they might be sorry to say, scientists. I was at a pharmaceutical company and I was asking, it was one of those full day workshops and we were doing creativity exercises. And people would raise their hands and say, could you be more specific about what you want me to do in this assignment?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they think they're not creative, but the reason is that, you just don't know the mindsets and the practices of creativity that will make you creative. In your book, you call it a system and the process, and you say it's absolutely learnable. It's just a matter of being exposed, whether it's a workshop or a book.
Yeah. If I had more time on a workshop, I would love people to do a tolerance test type of thing at the start of the session, and then one at the end of the session as well, so you could really measure it. The time that I have, it's not normally possible to do that. And it's one of the reasons that when I do the workshops, I teach using that terminology of tools. I'm going to give you a set of tools, and like any toolkit, some of them are going to sit at the top of the box, and you're going to use those more often. Other ones are going to be slightly more niche tools that you'll only use every so often. And I would especially say I did 2 events in the Philippines last year, and Philippines, it's great. I mean, there's a really young population. They're really enthusiastic. They speak great English, fantastic English, which makes it very easy for me. But their education system has failed them, I would argue, when it comes to creativity. And you have to really work a little bit harder to kind of get them to recognize what creativity is, first of all, why it's valuable, then to show them that they are creative, and to kind of break them out of some of the ways that they've been doing things and thinking about things. And I simply just put it down. It's not therefore, it's the way that, or not, creativity is not taught. Let's put it that way. And if I look to a system, let's say I'm in Scotland just now, and Scotland's always been pretty good at producing quite creative people coming out of schools and universities and their work. And one of the things that they're doing even more recently, which I think is great, is doing this type of teaching in primary schools, elementary schools, where they'll talk about a spider. Okay, let's write a poem about a spider. Okay, let's do maths. Let's talk about how many legs a spider has. And then, okay, let's do art. Let's paint a spider. Let's write a poem about a spider. Okay, let's create a little computer game based upon the life of the spider. That is, in terms of just working that creative muscle for children, I think is very, very, I think it's wonderful. I wish we would see more of that ability to recognize that so much of where the big innovation comes from is the boundary crossing. I mean, you look at Nobel Prize winners. One of the things you often notice about Nobel Prize winners is their boundary crossers. They have their expertise in one field, biology or chemistry, but they take stuff from other fields to create entirely new fields. And I think that way of teaching in elementary school is a really good way of getting people to recognize their creativity.
I'm glad that you just started talking about tools, because it's a really great transition into the last question I'm going to ask you. I always like to end my interviews by asking my guest if you can give some advice for the listeners, like a practical tip, a tool, an exercise, something you can do in the next week that might enhance your creativity.
Yeah, so probably one of the easiest ones, I'll talk about an AI one, then I'll talk about one that is not AI, and then I'll talk about one that is kind of AI. So one of the simplest ones that's kind of not AI is to change your route to work every day. Just to change up your pattern, the way that you're doing things. We get stuck in this kind of certain way, and I'm a great believer in having a diversity of inputs is very powerful. So that's one way you can do, or go and if you can still go into news agents and places and get magazines from completely obscure fields. That's great. I think that's one of the things that lends to my creativity, is I speak to so many industries. I'm learning things from one industry, and then I can see how it could apply to a different industry. So go out there, just make yourself a bit uncomfortable. Go a different route to work, for example. The human AI one is a really nice thing I think you could do, is to build yourself. In the book, I describe it as an imaginary mastermind or a virtual mastermind. Imagine 4 or 5 individuals, maybe people you really admire, living or dead, real or unreal, doesn't matter who it is, and use any of the AI tools, any of the ones you decide, and say, I'm going to build a virtual mastermind. These are going to be the 5 people. I want you to understand everything there is about these people. And then what you do is you start to give it tasks. Okay, I have this decision I have to make. Could be a career decision or something else, an artistic decision. You're thinking about making a creative, project. And then says, what would the questions be from these 4 or 5 individuals? And because the AI understands how, I don't know, Warren Buffett thinks, or Elon Musk, or Mary Barra, whoever the person is, what is interesting is the questions that it comes back to you with really starts to make you think a little bit more deeply about that project. So it's not giving you the answers, it's just nudging you. It's like having that kind of creative peer we spoke about earlier. And I think it's such an easy thing to do. Is just to create a virtual imaginary mastermind and just say any challenge or problem or thing you're trying to figure out. It's like, well, what does my mastermind say? What questions would they have about this? And I think that's a really powerful use of artificial intelligence to open up our own curiosity, our own creativity.
That's great advice. And thank you so much for coming to talk about your new book, SuperCreativity. I think it's been a great conversation. Thank you.
My pleasure. Great to be on the show. Thanks, Heath.
What really resonated with me about this conversation was the focus on collaboration. The creativity doesn't happen in isolation. It's always a collaborative activity. And that's one thing you get from the jazz ensemble metaphor. I think it's really interesting that James has a background in music and that he's been a music producer. He knows what goes on backstage and the collaborative nature of musical performance. Whenever we're working with other people or even with AI tools, creativity is something that comes out of collaboration, something that we always build together. If you're interested in practical ways to become more creative, I highly recommend his book, SuperCreativity. If you like this episode, please subscribe, like the show, share it with someone like you, someone who's fascinated by the science of creativity. Thank you for listening to The Science of Creativity. If you liked this episode, I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast, and please rate the show because that helps others like you hear about the show. Please write in the comments if you have requests or ideas for future episodes. I'll see you next time on The Science of Creativity for insights and inspiration about art, design, and invention.